I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you can just let the record show that all 7 commissioners are present. Is there any correspondence that you have?
That I'm aware of, Mayor.
Okay, great. At this point in time, we have to consider a vote for the commissioners to accept the consent agenda, and the consent agenda is typically to do with the approval of minutes, but we have no minutes to approve, so we're going to just move forward with the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. We have, good afternoon, everyone. We have one street aid expenditure to Delmarva Power in the amount of $9,227.18.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve a street aid expenses of $9,227.18. Any discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Happy to report the work on the Boardwalk restrooms, the 3 restrooms, just about complete. Delaware Avenue and Rehoboth Avenue are open, and they'll be open throughout the weekend. Baltimore remains closed for the weekend, but hope to have it open before the Memorial Day weekend next week. Just a reminder that seasonal ordinances are in place. Dogs are not permitted on the beach. Bikes are allowed on the sidewalk certain times, and only, bikes on the boardwalk during the hours of 5 and 10 a.m. So that's in effect, and we have our tent ordinance, our smoking ordinance, and no left turn signs. They're all in effect now. And parking meters go into effect next Friday of Memorial Day weekend through the second Sunday following Labor Day from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Meter rates are $2 and $3 per hour, depending on where you are in the city. Change machines are available, and time limits on the meters vary from 30 minutes to 12 hours. The city will hold its annual municipal election on Saturday, August 10th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the Convention Center. 2 seats for city commissioner will be contested, and the terms of office are 3 years for each position. To be eligible to vote on August 10th, you must register before July 11th, and candidates for elective offices shall be by petition signed by not less than 10 or more than 25 qualified electors of the city and filed in the city manager's office on or before 4:30 p.m. Monday, June 3rd. DENREC's Rehoboth Outfall Permitting Project team received the 2018 Governor's Team Excellence Award. The team was recognized for their commitment, effort, and growing use of quality improvement techniques. They were obviously tasked with assisting the city through the permitting process of our major wastewater outfall construction project, and it was a collaborative, innovative approach that involved combining and streamlining processes, as well as working through some of the federal agency barriers that were set in place. So we're happy to have the team led by Greg Pope receiving recognition for the award. The spring newsletter is available online, city's website, cityofrehoboth.com. Limited print editions are available at City Hall or requesting a copy from the Communications Department. Memorial Day schedule, City Hall will be open Memorial Day, Monday, May 27, during regular business hours, 8:30 to 4:30. Residential trash pickup will remain on the regular schedule for Memorial Day. And next Friday evening, May 4th, next Friday evening, May 24th, 8 p.m. marks the 56th season of the Rehoboth Beach Bandstand Summer Concert Series, where we've been providing free entertainment for the public. Mr. Miller's been working with the parking department to install 46 pay stations. They are installed. The software is ready. Batteries were installed today, and there's a lot of work and training still to be done, but certainly the staff will start enforcing the meters next Friday. Thank you.
Excuse me, is that the T2 system, the new parking kiosks?
License plate recognition.
Yeah,
We
the
have
new,
46
it all
of those.
integrates with the T2, the new technology?
Yes,
Oh, cool.
yes.
Oh, excellent, thanks.
We have a van,
Yeah.
goes down the street. Of course, it's a pilot project.
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully, we'll get through it.
Thanks.
Before we go on, I'd like to mention a couple things. First, I ran into Bill Maffey. He was putting one of the towers in yesterday, and he informed me that after all the towers are up and running, that they're going to actually take out the poles that the old Dunkin' meters were on Maryland Avenue and Baltimore, where the new kiosks are going. So I think that's very positive. Also, a couple things, I'd like to commend the city manager and her staff on a couple things. First, I was walking on the boardwalk today, and, I looked down the boardwalk looking south, and there's someone walking their dog right near the Delaware restrooms. And I thought to myself, oh, you know what, and then all of a sudden, from my left, two police officers walk over, very nice conversation with the person, pet the dog, and suggested that, the rules are such that you can't walk on the boardwalk. The gentleman walked right off with the dog, and the police officers walked on. So they did a great job of just basically telling them what to do. Explaining the rules. And then the second, I've received 3 or 4 very positive comments, and I appreciate it myself, about the sign at the convention center sign, pointing out that what Mr. Brittingham pointed out last week was on First Street and Second Street, no longer can you turn right on red, and no longer can you take a left. And a number of both residents and businesses have commented positively on it, that they were made aware of it as they were coming into town. So I think that was great that the communications department worked with IT to put that up there. And
Just one more
Sure.
thing, I'm sorry if you have something
Nope.
else. Yeah, I failed to mention that the recycling center summer hours of operation, Monday, Friday, and Saturday, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So we'll see how that goes. I was down there today. There is some traffic, but not a lot. So we'll assess that later in the summer, sometime in July, to see how the Saturday is working out.
Thank you for trying Saturday again, much appreciated. Promote that out to our neighbors.
And also, in your packet, you'll see just a little chart of a report from the Director of Public Works regarding the wastewater treatment plant expenses. I think that's a nice update on the monies that have been spent, our outstanding debts, so on and so forth. So please make sure you take a look at that, and that will be up on the website. Thank you. With that, on City Solicitor.
Only one thing to report, Mr. Mayor. There's a Parks and Shade Tree Commission appeal hearing that's coming before you all. Again, you'll be represented by Max Walton in that, because I represented the Parks and Shade Tree Commission. That hearing is going to be on a motion to dismiss it. It won't be on the substantive merits, but it'll be at a Friday, June 21st meeting.
At
all I have.
It'll be at the regular meeting?
It is at the regular meeting, that's right.
Okay. All right. 24. Thank you. With that, I'll just start looking at any kind of reports. Go right down to the committees. Animal issues, anything?
The next meeting of the Animal Issues Committee is scheduled for June 18th at 2 p.m. It'll be a continuation of our review of the animal code for the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Bandstand Convention.
Yes, our next meeting is next Wednesday. I think it's the 22nd at 9:30 here in the agenda and such as, and the materials are already posted.
All right, great. Boardwalk and Beach.
Yes, the Boardwalk and Beach Committee met last Monday, May 13th, for a field trip on the boardwalk. We were intending to walk from the south point all the way to the north point with tours at the 3 public restrooms. However, if you recall, it was in the 40s, it was heavy rain and winds, and we ended up conducting our entire meeting in the Beach Patrol headquarters, and we did have tours of the restrooms. So it ended up being very nice. Well, one of our main topics was getting reports and updates from the city manager and Kevin Williams on boardwalk and beach projects, and so we're very grateful for them to come and spend time with us and update us. Our main conversation had to do with bike routing on the North Boardwalk. What do you do with bicycles? How do you get them on and off the very north terminus of the boardwalk? It happens to be a conversation that the city Streets and Transportation Committee is also looking at the same time. And it's going to be interesting to share stories or reports with you, because obviously, and we've acknowledged at every meeting that we've got two committees, two different sets of perspectives, and we may align or we may not, but hopefully both sets of reports and recommendations will be coming soon and be of value to the mayor, commissioners, and city manager going forward. In your packet and embedded in the agenda is a support document from the Boardwalk Committee dated May 14th. It's really just somewhat self-explanatory. It is to give you an awareness of some topics we did recently reviewed, but also upcoming potential, I call them potential topics that we may put on our agenda, because as you know, I like you all to know ahead of time what we talk about so that you can give us input or comment on it or attend or whatever. So with that, I just do want to remind you that if you have anything additional that you would like us to talk about, to let us know. We're kind of running out of things to do with, and we're not trying to make things up to keep us busy, because we've had a busy year or something. So there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time and effort to walk up and down the boardwalk in the cold weather. Too bad it wasn't like today. Okay, Law Oversight, there's no one here from that committee. Mayor's Committee on Trees.
We met last Friday. We had an extremely productive meeting. Just a couple of highlights. We debriefed the activities of Arbor Day that recently took place in April, and we're getting ready for Arbor Days in the future. Want to make them bigger and better. The second thing that I'd just like to spend a minute reminding the commissioners that last year you approved, or we all gave consensus to, a commemorative tree program. And it had, the central part of it is a sculpture of a tree that will then lead to leaves that will be attached to that sculpture so that folks can make donations and be acknowledged for their support of Tree City USA. And I just wanted to let you know we are expecting a couple of proposals from artists the first part of June, and so we're moving forward to try to get that program up, running, and so that we can actually start to interact with the community, to start to not only get our sculpture ready, but to get their support for it.
Great, thank you very much. There's no one here from Parking Advisory or Streets. We can move right into old business, which is discussion on creating an administrative variance provision within the zoning code as permitted by 22 Delaware C 327A3. Commissioner Schlosser, and I know the solicitor has some things as well.
Great. As well as Representative Jean Lawson from the Law and Oversight Committee, who's actually been taking a lead in this as well. So let me just kind of give, and Commissioner Caluzzi as well, please jump in. I know you've been at some of the initial meetings. So basically, let me just give kind of quick background on how this came about. We've been focusing, a lot, I know the city manager and her team, on, permitting processes, improvements, making things quicker, less expensive, for folks. And one of the areas that where a potential issue was identified is that there's really not a process or an opportunity for minor, modifications or variances or such to be to be granted, not within the, that's not currently within the authority of the city manager. So, that was also brought up by the Chamber of Commerce. A representative recommended to us that we consider putting in place an administrative variance similar to something that the county already has in place. And at this point, I'd like to ask Glenn, maybe talk through a little bit about, the intent of that variance, how it's going, and what the legal precedent for this type of activity is.
Sure. So the way it works is, and the mayor quoted the state code section, 22 Del Code section 327A3. That's the section of the code, the state code, that sets up boards of adjustment. So boards of adjustment are typically the bodies that are able to vary or change zoning laws. And there's a whole set of standards that they go by when they hear applications. But this provision of state code says, however, if a municipality would like to create an ordinance where the variance that's being allowable is no more than 1 foot, and we'll probably talk a little bit about whether it's height or whether it's setbacks or what it is, a municipality can take that action, but it has to be done through ordinance by the commissioners. The county has already done it. They have a variance or administrative variance procedure in place, and they have the full 1 foot allowance, but it's not for all zoning laws. It's only for certain zoning laws. I think it's setbacks and separation between buildings. So this discussion here is more about how you would envision maybe a administrative variance ordinance looking, and I know that there's a lot of work already been done on that. There have been cases that have come before the Board of Adjustment in the city that we all did kind of scratch our heads. There was one that I can remember where it was literally covering siding, but it was going to be a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, extension, and they were already at the building line, so it went over their line onto the next person's line by a very short amount. If that neighbor doesn't object, and this ordinance would require some notice to the neighbors, and if that neighbor doesn't object and it's a 1/4 or a 1/2 inch encroachment, is that something that would be appropriate for an administrative official to approve or not? And that's kind of what you're going to consider. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that background. So kind of with that as the background, the Law and Oversight Committee was asked to research various options as to how we might be able to take advantage of some of this to make it easier for some of our property owners to move forward with permits and other activities. So I'd ask maybe Jean Lawson, who has been working with who's on the Law and Oversight Committee, has been working with Hoyt Decker on kind of what they've done so far, the feedback that they've gotten. They had actually put together kind of a initial draft of what something like this might look like, vetted it among their committee, and also got input from both current and previous members of the Board of Adjustment. And one other piece of data while Jean's getting ready there, we got some data from the city on the number of potential variances that they've seen over the past, I think since 2015, there's been 41. And their assessment was that approximately 20% of these variance requested probably could have been resolved quicker and at less expense to the citizens and to the property owners had there been some sort of administrative variance or administrative remedies policy or ordinance in place. So with the, I don't know, Sharon, do you want to add anything else into that comment?
Well, I think if the commissioners move forward with this and, actually hear some of the examples, just, the minor one that Glenn pointed out, we have this all the time. It would be beneficial for me and staff to be able to have some leniency regarding these minor, what I'll call just minor revisions. So there's many that come through. I won't say, well, Dom, gave you those statistics of 41, but it is something that, for something very minor, it would be helpful if this is codified.
And just one kind of other thanks, Sharon. And one other piece of data I had the opportunity to talk to the county administrator who's responsible and has the authority to approve these administrative variances for the county. And they're a little different. I mean, different lot sizes, all sort of, just differences between the two. But basically, she said that about 10% of the variance requests that come through are now handled through their administrative variance process and the new ordinance. And she said it's really cut the time, to get some of these smaller, approvals through and cut the cost as well for the citizens. So a lot of good data to support moving forward and starting to talk in a little more detail. So with that being said, Jean, you want to give just a little background on what you guys have done and where you are with the Law and Oversight Committee?
Yeah, what we were doing is frankly something that goes to this subject, but a little bit different way of doing it. What we're looking at is a situation where, in normal federal or state situations, a law is passed, and then typically the agency that enforces the law has a rulemaking procedure that allows for putting in place rules and regulations that interpret what the statute is doing. And that's what we were looking at more generically than looking at a specific variance with respect to zoning or whatever. And at the same time, we were trying to make certain that we were trying to get the city within the guidelines set forth by Judge Jordan in the case a couple of years ago about the signs, where he said what the city was doing was unsatisfactory and unconstitutional because it was being done with rules of thumb, which is basically the rules like you may be talking about, but they're not written. And therefore, they can be changed and everybody's not necessarily treated the same. So we're just looking at those two things and balancing whether to try to go for that variance, administrative variance thing, or a rulemaking that would just provide for generic interpretation across the board.
All right, thanks, Jean. And I'll just kind of sum up on next steps and open the floor up to any discussion. So as Jean said, and as I mentioned in terms of where we are so far with this initiative, based on the feedback from the draft, the city manager and her team are reviewing and actually going to draft something that may be more of a policy than an ordinance, but they're consulting with Glenn and others. That basically would help us maybe codify some of the informal practices, regarding administrative remedies, and by providing kind of a procedural review guideline or guidelines going forward. So we're still looking at the best way to move forward with this. Based on the data, there is kind of a need to give the city manager some more authority via an ordinance or a policy. But how we do that the best way is still being evaluated. And again, we're looking to have a draft in probably 30 to 60 days for our review. So I don't know, Pat, do you have anything else you want to add based on
Not really. I think you've summed it up quite well, and we've had the input from Jean as well. I think that's been helpful. So I have really nothing else to say.
Okay. And open to anybody else on the commission.
At the
for
last
feedback.
meeting, I encouraged you, it was off the agenda, and I encouraged you to put it back on. So I'm very aware of the need for this, because I've gone to plenty of Board of Adjustment cases the last 20 years where I can remember a constituent had a modular house put in Country Club Estates, and it was put down askewed, so that it was off 2 inches on this side and off 2 inches on that side. And yet when you go for settlement, as you know, they want to make sure everything's absolutely correct. And so you've got a lot of these emergency cases, if you will, going in front. So I don't know whether an administrative variance would take care of that situation or not and satisfy the loan company or not, but that's something that could be looked at. I'm very interested in this. Of course, we have nothing in front of us now. I did receive something from somebody, but it sounds like we don't have a support document to react to here. I know state law indicates that what we can do and what the county does. I'm not sure I would ascribe to what the county does, because they got different size lots and different circumstances altogether. Do note in the Title 22, it does say if you do create this other entity to do it, that you still need to have it subject to the standards, procedures, and conditions set forth and everything. So you would still, in my mind, you would still need to adhere to notices and letting people grieve, and how do you do that, et cetera. I would suggest that some of the discussion and analysis of this process look not only at, as the Title 22 says, look at designating a town official or a department with the authority to do that, but also looking at different methodology to allow a quicker process and cheaper process under the auspices of the current Board of Adjustment that handles this all the time. And I personally would, again, without having much in front of me, I'm leaning toward that second option there. The other things that have to be considered for me, or that I would like considered, are how does this impact the floor area ratio, the lot cover? You give somebody up to 12 inches, which I think is exorbitant, way too much for an administrative variance, but you give them that, how does that impact these other zoning codes? And I think that's a valid question, et cetera. So I'm anxious to see it come forward, but I do have a lot of questions on how it would be administered.
I just have a quick comment. I think for me, I don't know how I feel about this yet because I don't think all the details have been worked out, and rightfully so at this moment. But when I hear the term no opportunity for minor variances, it's all going to boil down to what's the definition of minor. Because, and the reason I'm smiling at this point is I got a phone call this week because this was on the agenda for us, and someone was explaining to me that we were going to consider allowing 20% variances. And when Commissioner Slosser just mentioned the number 20%, I believe, had to do with, what did it have to do with? Things that could have been resolved in a more efficient fashion. It just goes to show how quickly we can be put in a position that misinformation has already been picked up somehow, because people talk, it's a small town. So I'm really glad to hear what the 20% really boils down to, because I can get back with this person and clarify to them, I don't believe that's the intent, to take all of our variances and say, well, you've got 20% wiggle room, I don't think the case at all. So I think just the, what a minor variance really is, and then hearing from the folks in building and licensing, either through the city manager or having them come, is always helpful, just like it was recently when Dennis Janney comes to us and talks about how things can be more efficient and better run. So that's all.
Yeah, and I agree. Things that Commissioner Mills or Commissioner Sharp just mentioned. As I looked at the county, I thought the same thing. Okay, up to 12 inches. Well, the county's properties aren't 50 by 100. They're much larger. And so having something specific in there is, and especially 12 inches, because if you look at side setbacks in the city, it's a total of 6 feet. So if you took 12 inches off the side that's 6 feet, that's 5 feet. That's 15% or 20%, whatever change. And so, my thought is, and this question is for the solicitor as well as the city manager, maybe as we go forward, should it be an ordinance or should it be a policy, and the policy being something that the city manager and staff can work towards to make sure that it's not a 12-inch thing when somebody wants to make the side setback 5 feet versus 6 feet, but if there's a 1 inch or a 2 inch, or much like the home that had been set on the property, it's 2 inches wrong here and 2 inches wrong there, that's something that might be worthwhile for the property owner to bring forward and not have to pay $1,000, maybe pay $100 or whatever, and maybe the process itself is a bit slower. So I think as we move forward, I'd appreciate the thoughts from a legal perspective of, should it be a policy or should it be an ordinance?
Well, I want to let you know, I will probably fight you on that, so you need to do your homework on policy. Why? Because our zoning rules are codified. They're in the code. And variances is a legal way to deal with variances from those code requirements. And so unless you codify a policy or something, I don't believe policy is appropriate and would give people adequate notice in the process and all that stuff.
I have no problem whatsoever codifying a policy. I'm just wondering if it's a specific ordinance that's, I question having a specific ordinance that says 12 inches or 6 inches or 3 inches.
That's why
Yeah, I'm more of a
reserve
policy.
judgment, but
a judgment policy.
I'm not.
Well, Section 327A does say that the legislative body of any city or incorporated town may, by ordinance, vest a designated town official or department. So it has to be an ordinance if we're going to, and the only way that it can be done is through this state authorizing statute. So I think it does have to be an ordinance. I don't know if you could craft one that gives some range, but I think that, if you're going to dip your toes into this, probably a ordinance of limited application like the county did. It only did it for setbacks and building separation, and probably of limited magnitude would make the most sense, at least initially, to see how it works. And when the state code says you have to apply, it says you can appoint this person, but it basically says this person is functioning as a board of adjustment, because this person has to apply all the same standards and regulations. So this individual will still have to say, yes, it's a administrative variance. It can go up to whatever you establish in the code. Maybe it's 3 inches, maybe it's 6 inches, whatever it is. But they're still going to have to say, what's the detriment to the neighbor? They still have to say, does this person have an exceptional practical difficulty? I mean, they're going to have some awareness of the standards that a board of adjustment would apply, and still take those standards into consideration, rather than somebody coming in and applying, saying, I would like a 4-inch variance, and it being rubber stamped. I mean, as Commissioner Mills said, you still have to look to all the factors that a board of adjustment typically would, and provide notice.
Well, for those reasons, I'm again, I don't have anything in front of me, but I'd be reluctant to put the onus on the building inspector or the city manager to do this when we've got a board of adjustment that I think could easily slip into this arena with special conditions and process and special fee and et cetera. So, okay, thank you.
Mayor, I just want to enter in and just say that I'd like to see this process continue to move along. A lot of good questions and issues are being raised here, and I just hope that those can be dealt with. I liked what Glenn just said about that it would likely have limited magnitude. I think that's an appropriate way to go at it. I look at it as a remedy to a number of situations where we can just bring about some efficiencies in city government as we work with our residents.
Something that just in conversation now that I'm thinking about, maybe we have an approach where if it's 2 inches, that the city manager can deal with that. If it's 6 inches, but not, something that doesn't rise to the top of what we would typically go to the Board of Adjustment for $1,000, maybe there's something in between there that they can go, and it's $100 basically, and it's a different scenario. Because I think it puts the reason for the $1,000, of course, I believe, is because we have a board of people sitting up here, and that's reasonable. But at the same time, sometimes when it's just so minor, it really seems like we need to find a different way to be more efficient. Maybe there are like 3 possibilities. Maybe we can have something minor enough as either a policy or the ordinance for the city manager and or the building official to make that decision. Just food for thought.
I was just thinking, and this is for the city solicitor, would it be appropriate for Commissioner Schlosser maybe to sit down with the chair of the Board of Adjustment, who is also an attorney, to get his perspective? Because I'm sure from their perspective, they would prefer, if something's a 2-inch thing or whatever, something minor, they'd prefer not to take so much time on that and focus on the other things. I don't know, but I don't know if that's appropriate.
Certainly would not be inappropriate. I think that input from the chair of the Board of Adjustment would probably be useful. I mean, they're the ones who see these applications and might have some insight as to whether it makes sense to have administrative variances or not, or to what magnitude and all those sorts of things, so.
So just to let folks know, I mean, there's, that's actually really good points. And, you know, we're not trying to rush anything through here. We're really trying to, you know, talk with a lot of folks. To your point, Commissioner Sharp, there was, quite frankly, a draft, I think, at one point that probably some folks saw that did have the 20% in there. And I think that was revised over time as we got more input and feedback in the process. So that's not where it is now. So just, you can report that back. It's and it's still a work in progress. It's intentionally being considered right now and drafted now because it's the summer. There's more people in town. This may be of interest to our property owners and to folks that will be here this summer. You know, I've heard a lot of good feedback that we're addressing this, as Commissioner Burns said as well. So to your point specifically about talking with the current chair of the Board of Adjustment, his input was solicited at this point, and he did give some basic input. But I certainly, as this gets more fleshed out and we start to see kind of a draft coming forward, I definitely see another loop back with him, with current and former members, with the group here publicly, you know, to get as much feedback as we can to make this something that we all can support and will increase efficiency. So, so definitely we got the first round of feedback, a lot more feedback to come, and that's where we are. So we're looking for a draft here in the next 30 to 60 days that everybody will have a chance to weigh in on even more.
Well, I'm sure you've reached out to Tom Evans, you know, Jim.
To who?
Tom Evans. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
He's got,
Yep.
what, 15,
Yep.
18 years
Yep.
of 20-some years of experience, and Jerry Capone, the current, he's got, what, 6 months of experience. Huh?
Well,
Yep.
but he was on the Board of Adjustment in Wilmington as well for many years.
So yeah, we got the initial feedback from those folks, and I definitely expect them to see many variations of this and give us more feedback over time. But if anybody has other folks that should weigh in early in this process, you know, please send those names our way. So,
Thank you very much. Keep us up to date.
and thanks, Jean and the Law and Oversight Committee. They've spent a lot of time and effort already looking at this, and I know they will even more in the future. So thank you for what you're doing, Jean and Hoyt, who couldn't be here today. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Walter Birmingham, 123 Hamilton Avenue. I appreciate what you're talking about. Walter Birmingham, 123 Hamilton Avenue. I think your definitions are important. I think it's a very logical discussion. I'm very familiar with licensing and people going to settlements and documents, and we've seen what happens with the fees for the Board of Adjustment when you have to do this, and it gets to be very expensive. But let's not forget that a lot of what you do, even for a couple inches, can slow up settlements, and then all of a sudden you have license agreements and stuff like that to go to. And whatever you do needs to have a path that have your changes that affect property lines, et cetera, to be recorded at the county. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.
We'll move right into old business B, which is consideration and possible vote on adoption of an ordinance to amend section 9229 relating to head-in parking at angled or perpendicular parking spaces, and section 9269 relating to parking meter zones. Mr. Evans.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners, members of the
Miller.
public. No problem. So what's before you again is an ordinance to amend Chapter 92, Section 29 related to head-in parking at angled parking spaces. I will mention that this version that's mentioned as, or noted as redlined in the agenda is redlined for the purpose of there were some minor additions to the ordinance, which I'll point out. So Section 92, or Chapter 92, Section 29, as well as Chapter 92, Section 69 related to parking meter zones. So for anyone in the public who, or anybody in the audience who hasn't or wasn't able to attend the workshop meeting where we discussed this ordinance, essentially what it is it reinstates Chapter 92, Section 29, which had formerly required angled parking, head-in angled parking. The reason for that is that the city's transitioned to a license plate recognition enforcement method for parking. And with that being said, we need access or visibility to license plates on vehicles, being that Delaware does not have front license plates. So this section was amended from the last time that you saw it to include perpendicular parking spaces. So not only do we have the angled parking spaces, we also have perpendicular spaces as well. So that was added in addition to the language head-in, because in conversations with the parking department, whenever you mention angled-in parking, not everybody knows that it's head-in parking. So just to clarify that. Chapter 92, Section 69 relates to parking meter zones. So formerly, how this section is structured in the code, there are two sections that address 3-hour parking zones and two sections that address 12-hour parking zones. So the thought here is to consolidate the two sections into one for the 3-hour and then do the same thing for the section that addresses 12 hours. The reason for that being if the police department or the parking department needs to enforce Section 69, they don't have to look up what street they're on to decide whether they need to enforce Section A or Section B. They just reference one section in general. So it would save a lot of time and energy, certainly on behalf of the parking and police departments. And then finally, on page 3, line 106, Olive Avenue, that was cleaned up, the language there, to just state that on Olive Avenue, from the Boardwalk to 3rd Street, both sides where a meter is present. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yep, Evan, thank you for your work on this. In the last meeting, we had the discussion as to perhaps giving some sort of specifying that this would there would only be warnings given for this, and then until a certain, maybe next year, and then we would start to enforce this. I don't see anything like that in here, so I'm wondering where we are with that.
Correct. So the way I feel is sort of warnings would be more administratively handled. So within our software e-ticket book, what happens is whenever a vehicle, whenever a hit comes up or a citation's generated, the violation would be marked as backed into a space or a violation of 9229. Within e-ticket book, there is a box that can be checked that allows for a warning. And what that does is it would print a citation, but it would be, the fine amount would be $0. So it's just a heads up that that ordinance is in effect, but essentially there's no fine associated with that. One of the things that I'll be doing this next week too is trying to go into that software and set a number of warnings that can be issued for a particular vehicle for the same violation. So for example, one person, if they're continuing to do the same thing over, they don't receive 5, 6, 7 warnings, that eventually they will be fined if they continue to violate that same violation.
I think that's super, but I also just, if you go away tomorrow and nobody else knows how to use this and this ordinance is in effect and we haven't put in warnings, then you're, who's to say that that would be consistently applied across the board? So I just on a personal note, I just have gotten feedback on sometimes we put in place these ordinances and don't give people an opportunity to react or, to to understand or to know that they're in place. I've gotten that on several ordinances recently, so I'm not quite sure what the downside. I'd love to hear from you. What is the downside of just putting something in line 28 that basically says warnings will be issued through September 2019? I'm just making this up. And then full enforcement will take place effective 2020. I don't know, just what's the downside of doing something like that?
I don't think I would codify that there's going to be warnings. I think it would maybe be appropriate to have a whereas clause that says, whereas it's the intention of the commissioners that any vehicle violating this statute less than 2 times be issued a warning. So that's some representation
Okay.
to the police department that
Well,
that's
it's
their intention.
discretionary.
Right.
I mean, and you never know the circumstances when you're out in the field as to what exactly is occurring. So I think warnings, just as in when police issue motor vehicle violations, and actually, other violations, sometimes misdemeanor violations. I mean, it's discretionary in what is actually the final outcome of any incident.
So how would you do the whereas statement, Solicitor, just for consideration?
I think it'd be something like, I'm trying to write it out now, something along the lines of, and I haven't written it yet, but whereas it is, so I would put right after be it, right before be it ordained, there'd be a, whereas the mayor and city commissioners wish to amend section 9229 relating to angle and perpendicular parking. And then the next one to say something like, whereas it is the intention of the mayor and commissioners that during the 2019 calendar year, or whatever period of time you want to put, that is the intention of the mayor and the commissioners that during the 2019 calendar year, anybody violating section 9229 subsection A be issued a warning for up to whatever the number of violations is, comma, at the discretion of the police.
Yeah. And Sharon, if it said something along the lines of at the discretion of the police, would you be more comfortable with something like that?
Well, I don't necessarily think it needs to be, this seasonal parking folks you're talking about, correct? Who generally issue the violations?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's that? Or the, I'm
It's
sorry,
not
the,
police
I'm
do
sorry, I
not issue
apologize.
these. Yeah, it's
At the
The seasonal
discretion.
parking enforcement officers, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, at the discretion of the seasonal parking enforcement. Yeah, gotcha.
Well, it begs the question for me, well, how many warnings do we give?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's-
Exactly, and I'm thinking of that too. I mean, Evan, working with the people that actually give out the citations, how many are there? I mean, and I would think, once we pass this, Evan will be working with June and her staff to point out that, hey, as far as this summer goes, unless someone's really taking advantage of us, they're gonna get a warning. Because I do think that if we put it down in print, it's, okay, is it 2 times, is it 7 times, is it 12 times? And I think some people will take advantage of it. I mean, I think it's good that we're codifying this, that this is the way it is, but however, if we're talking to the people that are actually giving the citations,
You objecting to the whereas statement?
yep. I'm objecting to any kind of language that says anything about giving warnings. I mean, I think that's just something that is part of what they do on a daily basis, and so discretion.
Well, I think I was the one that generated this discussion at the last meeting, because I suggested $5 fine or something. The way I look at it is we've given our visitors, 5-6 years to unlearn that you don't have to head in parking. Now, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
poof, you've got to do head in parking.
Right.
I've walked up and down the first block of Maryland Avenue. I don't believe there's enough signs there, and I believe we're going to get a good number of people that back into their spaces because that's what they learn. And so I think for me, hopefully there's a public outreach program and there's those signs, but I'm pretty much convinced the big learning curve is going to come from backing in and getting that violation notice. So I am absolutely, can only support this if there's some language in it. We either say that 0, there's no fine until it goes into effect for the summer 2020 season or something like that. But again, just
What's the downside?
I've been around enough where I've seen people coming back to their cars for the tickets, backing in, and they're not happy campers. And
No, but what's the downside of putting in the whereas clause? To me, that seems like a good solution. Because it just basically says we don't plan to fine anybody this year. But there's some sort of discretion, it's like if somebody did it all 7 times, 10 times, whatever the number might be, so it has to be somewhat discretionary. But mostly, I think it's not going to be an issue. I mean, I think the whereas clause would work.
Yeah, me too. I agree. I think that, I mean, look, if you, I don't know, to me, it's a broader thematic thing. I mean, and we've spent, as Commissioner Mills put it well, and we've spent 5 whatever years having people unlearn how to do this, and now we're just expecting them to know with one sign and one sign of a pen, and all of a sudden it's changed.
Right.
So I mean, why not give people the benefit of the doubt and give them a warning and make this consistent and not put our seasonal employees in some position where they're constantly, having to apply some sort of random inconsistent judgment here. Just let's tell them what the intent is this year and then start to enforce it next year, and that makes it a more pleasant experience and a more consistent experience and more hospitable experience for everybody coming to our town.
Can I interject, may I? And whatever you decide certainly is great. I just wanted to give you information that I don't know what happened, prior to my service here, but now every summer, pre-season, the parking superintendent, and now with Mr. Miller, actually have at least 2 sessions with all of the folks coming on, and whatever the commissioner's policy is, in this case, I'm referring to clean, safe, and friendly, that's handed down to everyone, so everyone knows that. Additionally, at the end of the shift, I'll say, the parking supervisor looks over those violations and actually questions an individual seasonal parking enforcement officer. In this case, it would be, because the instruction was only to give warnings, why, if it should happen, why in this case was a citation issued. So the only thing I'm saying is that education is provided to the seasonal officers, but if something comes back, and that's why I say discretion, it's like a war zone out there sometimes. So, the seasonal enforcement officers are friendly, but they're not always well liked, because that's their job. But in this case, if a citation were to be given, I would certainly think it's for a good reason. For the first year, if that's how you want to go, certainly that's, how we'll go. But they all know at this time that it's, not to be given. And all I'm saying, and I'm not defending the position at all, because again, we'll do whatever you want. And I understand what you're saying, to put it in writing. But sometimes for me to say, no, you can't do this, I'm not out there. And if it comes back that somebody is, as the mayor said, giving somebody a hard time or, taking advantage of the situation, it's the staff discretion to give a violation notice or not. That's all. But they all know from the get-go that we're not giving violations for for this particular ordinance. That's all.
It just seems funny that we're creating an ordinance that has a specific fine, and we're saying don't enforce it. So I'm not comfortable yet.
Aren't you encouraging not enforcing it this year? I'm sorry, now I'm confused. You don't, You think do you think we should enforce it this year or not enforce it?
No.
You
I
don't think we should
I
enforce
don't.
it?
I think it's going to take a couple years for people to learn.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So
Okay.
now I'm
You got to
confused.
remember, we got locals that are going to come consistently and they're going to learn it and everything. But otherwise, we've got visitors, new visitors every week, new visitors every day. And I think it's going to take a while for them to learn. So no,
Well, if they're
am
new
not.
visitors, they're not going to know anything about it.
So I'm confused, because if our intention is that these will only be warnings, and the city manager is confirming that in practice, they will be warnings, I'm not understanding any problem with that. Could somebody help me?
If it's not written down in the ordinance, you leave it open for some sort of different interpretation or inconsistent implementation of the practice. So I'll go back to Commissioner Calusi's question. I can't see any downside to putting it in the way that Glenn laid it out, putting it in writing.
Oh, okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Now I get it.
Okay.
Because when the city manager said, on a discretionary standpoint, if someone is really combative with one of our seasonals, and the decision is made to give that individual a citation rather than a warning, if we put it in here like that, it takes that option away.
No, it's the intent of the commissioners. I think that's the intent of the commissioners, to give a warning. If someone's abusing it, then I think that it's not going against what necessarily the intent was, or, you can help me with the words here, City Solicitor, if that's what you think.
What I wrote, and I understand both sides of the argument, because once it's in writing and somebody is combative and you end up giving a citation, that person's going to find this paper and say, but you said.
That's my point.
So
The
I see
person's
both-
going to
I see
find
both
it
sides of it,
and
obviously.
fight us on it, that's not what the ordinance says. The ordinance says you cannot give me a citation even if I act inappropriately and the seasonal decides they honestly don't have a choice other than to give a citation. You know what I'm trying to
Here's the
say?
way here's the way I wrote it that I think, here's the way I wrote it that I think would give that seasonal still the option to do it.
Okay.
But again, I understand both sides. So that the whereas would say, whereas the mayor and commissioners desire to amend the city code relating to parking, whereas it is the intention of the mayor and commissioners that any person violating section 92-29A, which is the angled or perpendicular parking section, where it is the intention of the mayor and commissioners that any person violating section 92-29A be issued a warning for up to 2 occurrences during the 2019 calendar year at the discretion of the seasonal parking enforcement officer observing the violation. So it says it's the intention that during 2019, for up to 2 occurrences, there be a warning, but at the discretion of the seasonal parking
Seasonal
officer.
parking officer, enforcement officer.
Yeah, I can certainly support that. I mean, friendly and welcoming is critical in our community during the season. But I think this says what
And the other
What,
piece,
what I would like to say, let me just say, it always strikes me when we're dealing with adults, why more than one warning would be necessary. I mean, a warning is just that. We are
An
dealing
arbitrarily.
we are
2, it
dealing
could be
with
1, it could be
adults.
none.
So if we say 2, then people that are going to violate this are going to do it twice.
well, but here's the thing. There's going to be some signs there that say head-in parking only. I don't think they're going to the code and reading what our intent is necessarily.
It's unlikely.
And they'll be really happy to get a warning if they've done the wrong thing. That's kind of my look at it. It's very kind of
That's
practical.
I think that's the practical side of it.
I'm okay with 1 warning if
I
that
am
makes
too,
sense. I
because
mean, I think 1's enough. I mean, to
One should be
honest.
enough. If-
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that I think 1 is enough. It seems silly to me to give more than one warning to an adult driver.
Yeah.
Because that's just giving permission to violate an ordinance again.
I would invite each commissioner to take an hour and walk with a seasonal. I mean, it can be very brutal.
I have
mean,
no
just
doubt.
the
And
appearance
I would
of a
like to do that.
seasonal-
Sign
Well,
me
you-
up.
I think it would enlighten you. We're friendly, sometimes folks aren't, even just
Sure.
when an officer walks up to say, hi, you're not allowed to park this way. So, for whatever reason, but that might be a good exercise.
So with that said, Sharon, what are you suggesting?
I think the way the ordinance is written is fine.
Okay,
My point was only to say, we don't go out there with, here we go. We're leaving the parking department and we're going to write 200 citations. There's no contest.
I don't think any of
there's
us
no-
are
We
are
don't do
are
that.
wanting to imply that.
So,
at
but
all.
if somebody gives an officer a hard time, again, it's discretionary, it should be discretionary.
I agree.
The whereas statement is okay, or the ordinance as is without the
No,
whereas?
no, I think that additional that Glenn just
Okay.
read is fine.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Any other further discussion on that? Well, given that,
Mayor.
maybe someone can, go ahead.
Let me just be clear, so the language that would say one occurrence, not up to two.
Right,
one occurrence.
right. Okay. But given that, we should probably get a motion.
Well,
Given
let me ask, is $50 fine the appropriate fee? I just,
What's a regular parking violation fee? Isn't it 50?
No, there are various, there's a $15 fine, there's $25 fine, there are different amounts.
So why is this one 50?
well, that's where I asked last time, I think, how do you handle front-end violations the first year? If they paid the meter and they're already paid, but they backed in wrong, and how do you handle it if they back in wrong and it's expired or they chose not to pay? I don't know the answers, but $50 just seems very high to me.
Yeah, I think it's too high.
For forcing one of our workers to get out of a car and go around and check. Yeah, it slows down the continuity of the driver and the LPR system and everything, but is it that big a deal? I don't know. I just think it's too high.
I think it's too, well, I'd like to know what the 15, the 25, the 40, what those all are. I mean, what's an expired meter? I don't know.
Yeah, so we're discussing right now, this is a new section, 9229 is a new section, but it was a reserve section because it had been removed when we took out when we took out a provision dealing with angle and parking. And we think this was the old provision that was in the previous code that was just brought back.
That's what I think too. So,
Amend the amount.
so this was on the books previously,
Correct.
6-7 years ago,
And what was,
this number,
Fine.
50.
That's what we believe.
I still think it's too high.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
we kept it the same, but you certainly can change it, or not.
What's an expired meter?
I think $30.
Again, if they pay the meter, but they
How much
back
is
in,
the fine for expired meter?
should they have it sucked to them?
Well, I think they has to
Versus-
have the same amount, but, I don't think it should exceed that of an expired meter.
Agree.
I don't even think it should be the same. Maybe $5 less?
All right, well, we're checking on that, or someone's checking on the actual dollars. Is the consensus to go forward with this change of whereas and one-time warning?
Yes.
Yes.
And the only question now is the fine. And so if if we're going to make something different in C, it would have to be, we'd have to change that 50 twice.
Well, let me ask this. If somebody backs in and they also have an expired meter, is that 2 violations?
Yeah.
So if so, then I'm willing to go to $20 or something for backing in so that it's minimal. Because if they backed in and they paid the meter, I think it's a learning curve, you know?
Well, you know, one of the things, and I think I pointed this out last time, is when someone backs in, for example, on Rehoboth Avenue, that's a major safety issue in my mind that's worth $50, not $20, because it could lead to, you know, a substantial accident versus, you know, someone pulling out from a parallel parking situation. So, I mean, maybe that's why it's 50 rather than 30 as everything else, but because I think, you know, I know for years, 5 years, whatever it is, they took the angle parking away so you could back in, but I just think from an angle perspective, especially on Rehoboth Avenue, I think it creates, and especially in the summertime, it creates a big safety issue, and I think people should be penalized for safety issues.
This morning, just as an aside, this morning, a waste truck, one of those big waste trucks on Rehoboth Avenue, backed into a parking space so that it could easily load up everything, just as an aside. I see people backing in and all over the place. I'm most familiar with the first block of Maryland and some of those others where the streets are wide enough that there's absolutely no problem backing in, especially if it's 90-degree perpendicular parking, but also Maryland Avenue in the first block, and same with Virginia and some of those others. It's so wide, there's absolutely no problem. Now, can you distinguish backing in Rehoboth Avenue versus the others? Probably not, you know.
I agree, you can't.
But we're doing this for the license plate recognition. I mean, that's why we're doing it.
And the safety issues.
Yep.
Well, and safety, yeah, but I mean, your idea
So it's
of a
twofold.
wider street being able to do
No,
it.
I think we're doing it for the LPR
Yeah,
system.
okay.
Safety never came up.
It comes up in my mind on Rehoboth Avenue.
It has never been mentioned until today.
Chapter 92, Section 80 is violations and penalties for parking meters. And that states not less than $30 nor more than $200. And I think where this fine might have been taken from was similar to 9272, which is parking within the designated spaces required. So that states no person shall park any vehicle in such a manner that it shall not be wholly within the parking space as designated by the lines or markings thereof. And that fine is consistent with what we have here, no, not less than $50 or no more than $100.
Okay, so with that whereas thing, what's the consensus on the dollar? I mean, any thoughts of?
I think what Mr. Miller just said, as far as being within the space and having the same penalty, seems to be very similar to backing into the space. So I'm fine with leaving it the way it is.
You mean at 50?
Yeah.
I just think as long as we're consistent with how we're applying or creating, you know, and if that's the consistent or, you know, fine, then we should stick with that. That's just my thoughts.
Before
You're
we
saying,
ask for a
excuse me,
motion?
consistent with the parking violation.
So an
Yeah,
expired
what
meter
he
is
read.
$30
Yeah.
or up to $200.
Yeah.
If somebody's not parked within their space, they're taking up 2 spaces or they're sticking out into the avenue, that would be a $50 fine.
Yeah, and I think it's consistent
That
with
seems
that.
fair, reasonable to have it consistent with that.
Right.
That's my thought.
Anybody else?
I disagree, but,
Okay.
I'm not, I'd rather it be less than the meter, but I'm, you know, it's more important that we pass this for the for the reason of the license plate recognition.
Yes.
Agree.
And given that the first year, we're basically looking at warnings, potentially we could be looking at the second year for warnings, because there's some things are discretionary. These things can be discretionary, according to
Yeah,
what city
and I would
administrator
think,
said.
given that we've had this long conversation about it, maybe there's a way to get the data at the end of the summer, how many tickets were, or citations were given. And if there's 20,
Right.
one thing, but there's 150, maybe there's a different one. But, so if we can make sure we do that,
Yeah,
that'd be good.
absolutely.
So, one small story. I backed into a parking place the other day, and the guy came down the road and said, "You can't do that, that's illegal." And it's somebody from Maryland or someplace. So, I know there are people who actually think that you really can't or shouldn't, so.
Wasn't a seasonal officer.
No, it was some guy in a beat-up car from Maryland.
Pat, please try to be cooperative
I
on
know,
this.
I will now.
And you know what I was just going to say before you said that, Pat, is, you know, in reality, how difficult is it to learn this? To not back in? I mean, is there a learning curve?
It shouldn't be if there's
Sure.
a sign and you can read.
Sure, there's a learning curve once. You get warned.
All right, before we take a motion in a second, did you have something to say, sir?
Walter Birmingham. Last year, and for the past several years, I've been telling people they couldn't, wrong directions and couldn't back in, et cetera. But because 5-7 years ago, the previous mayor, it got changed and people started learning it. It's very hard to unlearn something. And I've talked with some people recently in dealing with this, that in some places where they still have single meters that they're putting on every meter, face-in parking only. I think you're having a very good discussion, but I don't have a red line copy. What's the season for this law? Year-round? Because if it's not year-round, it's even more confusing. You put it into effect in the summer, I'm just hypothesizing, and then you turn it off. And then you have Wilmington that runs license plate recognition on their police cars and special vehicles, and it won't be long before we'll probably have it on our police cars, and there's nothing wrong with that. You have Ocean City, I don't like to compare with them, but they record the license plate number of everybody that drives into their city, and it has proved invaluable other places that they have riding down the highway. A policeman goes hot on somebody because their license plate comes up on the system. It works very fast. So if it's not year-round, it should be. There's no sense putting it into effect, taking it out, putting it back in, put it into effect, and leave it into effect year-round.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there's no seasonality mentioned in here, so I would say that it's year-round. Glenn?
Well,
It's year-round. You know, some of the meters will go off, you know, like they normally do, but it's still, this ordinance is year-round.
Okay.
well,
With-
no, unless I'm reading it wrong, 92 Section 67 applicability says the provisions of this article shall be effective Friday immediately preceding Memorial Day until and including second Sunday following Labor Day.
But you're in a different article though, right?
But that
Aren't we?
is correct.
So that's for the actual meters, not the 9229 is in
Parking.
Article 5.
Right. Okay, my apologies.
So with that in mind, can I get a motion and a second to approve an ordinance to amend Chapter 92, the Municipal Code of the City of Rehoboth Beach by inserting a new section 9229 relating to head-in parking at angled parking spaces and consolidating sections 9269 relating to parking meter zones with the amendment that the solicitor will put together as the whereas clause?
I so move, as the mayor just articulated.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the table to amend Chapter 92, as I just mentioned, and also adding the whereas clause that the city solicitor will work on. With that in mind, I'll just go right down the,
Discussion.
sure.
I'm very supportive of the entire thing, except for that fee. And probably if you got me discussing it, I'd probably say all the other fines need to be reduced a little bit. But anyhow, so you know how I'll vote. A roll call vote, please.
Yep. Commissioner Byrne,
Aye.
Commissioner Sharp,
Aye.
Commissioner Schlosser.
Just a clarification that this is year-round, right? I just want to confirm that.
yeah.
Okay, aye.
I apologize.
Commissioner Mills,
No.
Commissioner Kaluzzi,
Aye.
Commissioner Sheffer,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. And
And just one more clarification.
Sure.
The Section 9290, Section 9229, which is head-in and angle parking, is year-round. The meters are not year.
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
with that, the motion passes. Thank you very much for all the explanation. Thank you, Evan.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Evan.
that. There is no new business. Commissioner comments.
Yeah, I've got a comment. I don't know whether it's a future agenda topic or if it's just for awareness or whatever, but the Boardwalk Committee, as I mentioned, we toured the 3 public restrooms on the Boardwalk, Delaware Avenue restrooms, Rehoboth Avenue, and Baltimore. And in Baltimore, and they're gorgeous, by the way. So whether you have to go or not, you should go down there and go in them and look at them because they are beautiful. Oh, you want this louder if I'm complimenting you? Okay. They are absolutely beautiful and clean and everything. However, 2 weekends ago, I believe it was, some men went in the men's room at Baltimore and put graffiti in 3 of the stalls. Significant graffiti, about this big, spray painted on there. And it's just a darn shame. And my recollection of the Boardwalk Committee's recommendations to the city manager, the mayor, commissioners, if I recall correctly, was that we get attendance for the men's room and the women's room, dedicated attendance. That means a woman in each, 3 women, 1 in each of the 3, and then 3 men, 1 in each. And talking with Sharon this weekend, and she indicated that did not happen in the budget. I don't recall that or not, but I just wanted to pass on that if this happens again, I would favor another discussion in seeking monies or funds to be able to put men attendants in each one, because we know they are a deterrent. Go to Ocean City, Maryland. Jay can testify. And I went to Ocean City, Maryland. They have a woman in the attendant in the women's, men in the men's for each of them, and it works. It keeps them clean or not. So it's just a shame that we have to deal with that people will do that. But I think it's a fact of life.
What's the approximate cost for an attendant for the season?
My recollection with the 1 male in each restroom and 1 female in each restroom for the time and duration the restrooms are open for the period May through September was $90,000. So I don't have that broken down. I don't have the contract with me, but that was removed from the budget when we were discussing it.
And remember that our bathrooms are open much longer than that on an annual basis. Especially the one at Rehoboth Avenue is 365 days. But the other 2, Baltimore and Delaware, are open, I think, is it 5 months? Somewhere close to 5 months. So that 90,000 is probably at least double to have that.
Well, I don't know what the magic formula is. I think certainly during the summertime, when you've got the most propensity for damage and criminal activity, which is what it is, that we ought to be thinking about. And if we're not going to do something, then I would at least suggest that we monitor and keep track of the graffiti. And when it gets to a certain level, we do hire attendants to get in there.
And the attendants are there for basically to monitor, to make sure that graffiti or any type of shenanigans don't occur, but also to just make sure it stays clean and such as well. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
paper towels that
Yeah.
tend to migrate to the floor and need to be
I
picked
mean,
up.
given
and
the
things like that.
investment of $250,000 per restroom, it seems like a minor investment here to put attendance in the male bathrooms. So I would like actually for the I would like to have the city manager look and see if we could go ahead and afford to have, go ahead and add these folks back in. Because my recollection, I think, is like yours, that we actually were going to have an attendant in each of the male and female bathrooms. So I'm a little surprised to hear that we took them out. And I'm sorry if I just forgot that. We had a lot of budget discussions, but I'd like to hear from you what the impact was and if we can do this within the budget now, because I just can't see that graffiti. It's going to cost, after making this significant investment, we're not going to have to go repaint. So I'd just like to hear what the trade-off might be to be able to put attendance there.
Well, if we recall, in the budget that was presented to us, it was $750,000, and yet later iterations, we were told that it would be less than that. So maybe we could get an accounting at some point.
a good point.
And see how
Maybe
much.
we should just put on
With
this
that, you're way into
next
a substantive-
agenda.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, we need to.
Next agenda, because I have a number of questions now that I don't feel comfortable asking because it's not on our agenda. But next time, maybe we should have a little more substantive discussion about what's happened, what the investment was, et cetera, and a plan forward.
So that's a good idea. Thank you, Commissioner Sharp.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments?
Just a quick comment that I've asked the mayor to add this item to the June workshop discussion, and that is extending the smoking ban on public property to those public properties where it was not previously added. Examples being along the canal, apparently in the area around the museum, for us to consider the City Hall campus here, Elkins Way, and there may be some other areas.
Yeah, so we're going to put that on the agenda for the June workshop, and if there are any other places that may have been left out, please bring your thoughts to the table. Anything else? Commissioner comments? Nope. Moving forward on the future meeting dates, our workshop is the 10th of June at 9 a.m. The 3rd of June, we have a special meeting relating to the commissioner's vision as we look forward for the city as it relates to the CDP ideas and future, if you will, on the city itself. Pretty broad topic. That's at 10 a.m. on the 3rd. And then on the 24th of May, which is next Friday, we have a special meeting, which will probably go right into executive session to discuss a legal issue. On this subject, a couple of commissioners have asked about the possibility of speaking to this subject and a possible vote. If that is the case, we have to make sure we get that on the agenda today and recognize what the discussion is going to be and consideration of a vote. However, I haven't mentioned what the legal issue is, and we will, but I'd like to, if anybody's got any points of view on that.
I think it's premature until we have the executive session.
I think just actually if it's something that comes up that there may be some timeliness to and requirement to have a vote, I don't see a harm in putting on the agenda that there may be a potential vote. Doesn't mean we have to have a vote, but if there's some sort of time sensitivity, it does give us the option to have a public discussion and a vote. So I see no downside to having it there. If we decide not to vote, we don't vote.
To your question, Commissioner Mills, it was suggested by the city solicitor to have an executive session on this issue.
I understand. My note was voting on something when.
Yeah, no, that's separate.
Right.
Yeah, I guess what I can add is that this issue could be, if to the extent there is a vote, it could happen during that executive session that's scheduled or during, or tacked onto the workshop meeting. The issue, as I understand it, and the individuals involved understand that it could be at the workshop meeting versus this executive session.
Forgive me, but you just said if we were to vote, it could happen at that executive session.
Well, after,
Not during the executive session. Well, I mean, that, we need to be clear. We don't vote inside the executive session.
We'd have to come out of executive session once the explanation and then have a
At
discussion.
the special meeting, would have the opportunity to vote, not within the executive session.
And what time are we scheduling this?
It is scheduled for 2 o'clock next Friday. But again, I need to get a consensus of having a discussion and getting it on the agenda for discussion and consideration of a vote.
I certainly think we should move forward with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Agree.
Okay, would you mind working with Ann on the language?
after.
Okay, great. And any other future meeting dates? No, I've got that. Any comments from the public? Sure, please.
I'm Jay LaGrue. I live on Prospect Street. Two things. Ernie, I don't know whether you're watching, but the lodging tax passed yesterday, the Senate. If anybody who has the chance to pull the handle for Senator Lopez, don't forget this. It passed and now it goes to the House, and I hope that it'll go through the House. This is the up to 3% lodging tax. That's one. Two, I was with Commissioner Mills when we talked to the attendants in the restrooms. This is a crazy subject in Ocean City, but they all had tip boxes and they were happy campers. Let me tell you, it was fun talking to those people. So it's not a bad job.
Thank you. And just for everybody's education, the Senate did pass the accommodations tax request that we put on the table to be able to implement an accommodations tax of up to 3% at some time in the future, and they passed it 21-0 yesterday. But it does have to go to the House, and their session, both Senate and House, is up today, and I think they'll be back within the 2 weeks, and then hopefully the House will take it up sometime early in June. And we'll hear from Representative Schwarzkopf on what kind of a date at that point in time. Any other comments from the public? Please, go ahead.
Becky Conley, I live on Maryland Avenue. I'm not a public speaker, so. I guess why I'm here is I'm probably one of the chattiest Jews you'll ever meet, and I talk to everybody. And since we bought down here 3 years ago, but we've always come here for our weekends, away from kids. But since I bought 3 years ago, I've gotten to know a lot of the people downtown. It's been the best part of my life when I get away. We have a big old house. We have people that have been renting from us for over 20 years. So I say I'm really just the steward of a really great house, and I steward their house for them. What I'm feeling in talking to people, there's a lot of distrust of what's going on. And people don't feel like there's a connection between the commission and the mayor and them. And part of it is because, of course, this year, everything went up. Our permits went up, the water and septic, I understand why it was important. And what is the overwhelming feeling is that it's something like feudal lords, and we're living in serfdom, and that, how could you take into account people, well, I can speak as a vacation owner, that, you rolled these things out April 1st, I was already booked, and there's no way for me to accommodate that now in my bottom line. In addition, there's a general fear that as we get bigger and bigger and bigger, that we're going to push away the people that can actually afford to stay downtown and stay in Rehoboth. Some of those great families that I'm talking about. And what I guess this is, I have to come to more of these. I plan to, but there is a real sense of disconnect between what is being enacted here and what is the end game. That's the overwhelming question. What is the end game? And I heard about the June 3rd meeting. I think that'd be an important meeting to kind of get a scope of, and I'll tell everybody to come. But the idea is you need to be aware that there is a serious disconnect on the street between what's going on here and the realities of people's bottom lines, whether it's bar owners and restaurant owners, whether it's the small shops downtown, and then of course the vacation rental owners that feel like, you know, how could you roll all of these things out all at once and not, you know, any local government or state government, when they have increases in these kinds of things, they phase them in over time. They allow you to adjust so that you can adjust your pricing, so that your bottom line is there. When you're paying off a nut, and I mean like a mortgage, and you have all these expenses, it's really important to be able to budget that. So I come here just for the first time, just to say that this is the overwhelming feeling I'm getting as a chatty Jew on the street. So I think that is a big question. What is the end game, and what is your vision for Rehoboth? Because we feel like it's changing, and we are going to end up pricing out these people that this is their home away from home. In addition, I just gosh, how am I doing? In addition, when you brought up the thing about the bathrooms, I just wanted to throw out there, I don't know if it's a deterrent, but the smile you're on camera thing, you know, if you have cameras in the not in the stalls, but in the bathrooms, is one way of at least cutting down. If people think that they're being recorded, then there's one way that you can hold people accountable when they go in. It might not cost as much, but it's an idea. Sorry. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky.
And just to not answer your comments, but to address your comments, unfortunately, we've found over the last couple of years that there have been a number of things over the last 10 or 20 years that were kind of left unfixed. We had this big project, the Ocean Outfall, which was not something like that, but we found, you know, down at the plant, a lot of things that we have to do to make sure that we can provide people, whether there are visitors or our residents, with the wastewater treatment that they become accustomed to. The same thing with the water system, same thing with the boardwalk, same thing with the storm sewers. And unfortunately, we're finding that over the next 5 or 7 years, there are a lot of things that we have to do, we have to prepare for today. And unfortunately, previously, it wasn't prepared for. So we're trying to catch up, and that's where a lot of it comes from. Mr. Brittingham.
Walter Birmingham. Not trying to be antagonistic, just a couple questions that I know I did not necessarily expect an answer. But when you raised the question on speed control on Columbia Avenue, we found out about speed pillows, and then they didn't happen. And when I asked Mr. Mills, I said, what have you heard on it? He said that city manager responded, one person asked for it. Don't need any comment to that. I'm just telling you what I believe is the only information that's come out about that. There was discussion several months ago, and the cell towers, the repeater towers, other service provider towers was put out, and some lawyer, some places, drawing an ordinance. I don't understand why they're drawing an ordinance. I thought it might be policies or whatever, but we haven't heard anything back on that. And it might be nice, some information back at either the city manager's report or a press release where that is and what's happening. The city put a lot of money in the tail end of an open avenue scape when they did the stoning of the streets after the outfall project. And it had to be uniformity. And now there's apparently a policy, if you want to do anything else, people weren't even done putting it down, and it was changed, and it continues to be changed. And when I got into it the other day with stones being put on a neighbor, shoulder 2 inches above the grade of the street and tremendously above the storm drain, I was told the policy was you applied to the city manager. The city manager is very hard to get to. I would think that would go through building and licensing, where they have people that can go out and do it, because that's who came out and looked at it the other day. And It just makes work for the city when you have contractors come in from out of town. There's no building permit put up there that they're allowed to do it any more than there was when the city came in and helped the trees to be torn down a couple years ago. If we have to get permits, why shouldn't everybody else? And there ought to be standards because the stones are ending up going into the storm drains, and it's just wrong. I don't mean to be controversial, but I think it's wrong that people from the police department, a lot of them, city employees, are not allowed to park on the city property. They have to park out on Rehoboth Avenue. So I don't know how many permits you pass out. I found some 2 years ago, and I took some pictures of them. But I think the parking is an issue, and I think the city employee parking ought to have some resolution. The public ought to know what you're doing. In the process of the cell sites being put, the original cell sites on Rehoboth Avenue at Boardwalk at the lifeguard shack, lighting was taken down, and there were no provisions in the contract. Nobody wanted to let us see the contract. Hell no. And there was no provisions to have the lights fixed. Have they been fixed yet? At the lifeguard shack, in front of Grotto's and Center Island, and in front of the post office. The last I heard, it was not in the contract and didn't have somebody to do it. And I think those things need to be fixed. They're dumb things, but they're important. They're safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Anyone else? With that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.